Good evening. Very happy to be here in New Orleans and be with you at St. Joseph's Church. I'd like to start out by thanking Father Tom Stellick for inviting me. And I'm sorry that I'm not able to interact with you face to face. I was looking forward to that. New Orleans is one of my favorite places. And Father Stakelum, who used to be our provincial, he came from New Orleans, and first time I went to New Orleans, I was a stranger and I didn't benefit from it very much. But then when Father Stakelum came, he introduced me to his family. And then I started to understand everything about shrimp boils and partying and all the things that make New Orleans famous. So I was looking forward to being with you in person. Maybe that'll happen later after we get through our present difficulties with the coronavirus, but I'm very happy to be here. And this evening also a few of my confreres have joined me here as an audience, so to help me to interact with them on a live basis. Okay, so first of all, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Hugh O'Donnell's my name, of course, and I'm a Vincentian. I grew up in this parish, in the parish of St. Vincent's in Chicago, where I live at the present time. I was ordained in 1961. Eventually, I was teaching in the seminaries. It's in Denver and St. Louis. I became provincial in 1978 for 9 years, and then I returned to St. Thomas Seminary, where I started. In 1993, the Superior General sent me to Taiwan, and Taiwan is part of the Chinese province, Taiwan and China together. So in the beginning, I was in Taiwan, and then later I was in China a lot. And so a year ago or so, I finished my time in the Chinese province, and I've returned here to the United States and live with the confreres at DePaul University in Chicago. So it's wonderful for me to have an opportunity to speak about St. Vincent. Like my confreres here, like all of you in St. Joseph's, we love St. Vincent. I love St. Vincent. I love to talk about St. Vincent. So this evening, I'm going to talk about the journey of St. Vincent. And the journey of St. Vincent turns out to be a journey of transformation. And I'm going to talk about the first part of his life, from the time he was ordained at the age 19 until he founded the Congregation of the Mission at age 45. To me, that's the most interesting part of his life. The next 35 years are the years we know most about. That's the famous Vincent. And he's not as easy to imitate as he's like transcended us in so many ways. But the first part of his life is a wonderful journey. You know, I was just saying that I spent my years in seminary work, and in seminary work I was never a pastor. In all these years, I'm ordained 59 years now. In all these years, I never became a pastor, which I regret, actually. It would be a wonderful thing in my life, but my life was different. And so, nevertheless, in the seminaries, so we had a chance, so we all would go out on weekends to parishes. And so we got to go to different places and so on. And in that process of preaching to different people at different times, different places, started to get feedback. And one of the feedbacks that I remember most of all is what people liked most of all, that they related to most of all, was the theme of journey. You know, when we were raised in pretty much a behavioral mode of here the proper behaviors to be a good person, a good son, daughter, seminarian, priest, and so on. But the real truth of the lives of people is different. The real truth of the lives of people is every person is on a journey. And That journey is unpredictable. We don't know how that's going to turn out, but we're led on a journey. So this evening I want to talk about the journey of St. Vincent until he was 45 years old and founded the Congregation of the Mission. It's a wonderful story, and I'm so happy to have a chance to share that with you. But before doing that, I'd like to show you a few pictures of St. Vincent. They show different aspects of his life. This first picture that you see is that classical picture of the portrait of St. Vincent. You know, most of the pictures that we see of St. Vincent are at the end of his life, when he was 75, 78, 79, like that, and so on. So we don't have pictures really from the early part of his journey. Nevertheless, here's this great classical picture of St. Vincent. You see great peace and love in his face, and it's we've gotten very used to that picture. And then this next picture that you see is a picture of St. Vincent in St. Peter's in Rome. This is St. Vincent up there. It's in one of those pillars up high like this in St. Peter's in Rome after he was canonized. And that picture shows Vincent carrying a book and raising the crucifix. This is Vincent the preacher. This is Vincent of the Congregation of the Mission, to go around to country places and wherever the people are in need and preach the gospel to them. So that's one side of Vincent. The next picture you'll see is Vincent holding two children. Now this is the one thing you know if you see a statue like that. The thing you know is that that statue was inspired by the Daughters of Charity, and it was made in the 19th century. See, after the French Revolution, the daughters grew very, very numerous and had great influence in France, and so the Vincentians were growing much more slowly and so on. But anyway, when you see Vincent with the orphan children, this is that inspiration comes from the Daughters of Charity. So these are the two sides of Vincent. Vincent, the preacher of the good news. Vincent, the man of charity, and all his people with him, Daughters of Charity, etc., like that. The next picture is also another representation of Vincent with children and carrying. It's the most well-known picture because Vincent's above all known for charity. So it's charity for the orphans and for the abandoned and for prisoners and so on like that. The next picture is more recent, in the 20th century, of course, and it shows Vincent sitting at a table with about 10 or 12 poor people. And in the center of the table, on the table, if you look carefully, you see the face of Jesus. So it's Vincent with his poor friends sitting around having dinner. I like to think of it this way. Vincent used to be in town doing business and so on. He would come home late because San Lazare was outside the city, come home late, and his poor friends are waiting for him. And then he invites them to dinner. So it didn't actually happen that way, but I see it as aspirational. That what we hope for, what we dream of, is that there will be a day in the future when everybody will be welcome to our table. And that's, we can eat with the poor people now if we go to where the poor are being served. But someday there will be an opportunity when our doors are open to welcome everybody to our table, whoever would come. So that's why I think of it as aspirational. It happened in part, but in the future it will happen altogether. So that's a beautiful one. And then the next one comes actually from here at DePaul University. It's in several of our other universities, St. John's, Niagara, and also in in the Philippines. It shows St. Vincent speaking to two students. One is a young woman, one is a young man. The two of them are different races, and I take that to mean that they represent everybody, men and women, men from different races, different backgrounds, and so on, which is true of DePaul University, which is true of a lot of the universities, that people come from everywhere. So, but Vincent's talking to them. We've seen, but we seldom see Vincent with ordinary people. And who are the ordinary people in the university? Students. So that's how that came to be made. And if you have a chance, and perhaps you've seen this before, but if you have a chance to see that statue or a picture of it, you'll see how engaged they are in their conversation. The sister who did this did a terrific job. The face of Vincent speaking to the young woman and the young man, and the way they're intensely listening, there's a real conversation going on there. And I might just add at this moment that statue has a special meaning for us today. The Pope Francis is telling us that the way forward is through dialogue, the way forward is through conversation. The way forward is through listening to people, especially people who are different from us, listening to them and sharing with them. So dialogue has become difficult in our times, but the way forward is really true dialogue, true conversation. So I like that statue for many reasons. And then the next picture that you see is a picture of Vincent. He's very kind, a great kindness in his face. It's a watercolor, and it shows his gentleness, his kindness, his mercy, his love. And then finally there's a stained glass window of Vincent that also communicates that same spirit of his. So those I'm happy you have a chance to see those pictures. It shows different aspects of Vincent in a graphic way. But now to turn to what I really want to talk about this evening is this, that I divided the life of Vincent into two parts, Vincent number 1, Vincent number 2. Vincent number 1 is from age 19 to age 45, from his ordination to the founding of the Congregation of the Mission, and then the last 35 years of Vincent's life is Vincent number 2. And so I'm going to concentrate on Vincent number 1. Now just the years are this way. Vincent was born in 1581, and he was ordained in 1600, and he was founded the Congregation of the Mission in 1645. Like, to relate it to something in our experience, the Mayflower landed in the U.S. in 1620. So it's like Vincent's life is parallels the Pilgrims landing in the U.S. and the development of our country from that point forward. So, but before going on to Vincent number 1, I just want to give a little picture of Vincent number 2 in just in a brief couple of seconds, in a minute. Vincent number 2, in 1625, he founded the Congregation of the Mission, the Vincentian Fathers and Brothers. In 1623 or 33, he founded the Daughters of Charity along with Louise de Marillac. Actually, earlier in 1617, before he founded the Congregation of the Mission, he started the Confraternities of Charity, which finally became the Ladies of Charity. And the Ladies of Charity were the noble women in Paris who helped him a great deal and helped in the hospitals and so on like that. So from there, he became the chaplain to the galleys, galley slaves on those galleys. They rode and like this. That was their punishment and so on. And he brought the sisters and the confreres to also serve them. In 1638, he finally accepted the challenge and to serve the orphans. Now, up until that time, the orphans were in foundling homes, but most of them died. But when Vincent accepted that challenge, and then really it was Louise and the Daughters of Charity went to work on that, practically none of those orphans died after that. So that was a wonderful engagement for him. And then he did a great deal for the formation and renewal of the clergy. This is one of his, we don't talk about that so much anymore, but it was really a fantastic achievement for him in his own life. And then also, the Queen asked him to be on what she called the Council of Conscience. That is, in her decision-making process in relationship to religious affairs, she needed advice and guidance, and Vincent was one of the people who did that with her and for her. But in that process, what he actually did was he insisted on choosing good bishops. That's the key, good bishops. So, because in those days, people wanted to become a bishop or a priest for financial gain. That was common. But Vincent saw that wasn't really, that wouldn't help the church, that wouldn't help anybody except the people who got that job, perhaps. But so he insisted on qualified bishops. And so sometimes he had to oppose some powerful people. Nevertheless, he did a great deal for that. And then finally, an important thing for him is Vincent lived in a time in which there was constant war. The 30 Years' War, the Civil War, they call it the Fronde. There were 2 civil wars in Paris. And so he lived in, it was just before his death that some peace came to the time. But he lived in a time of devastation and so on, but he responded to that. In the provinces outside of Paris and also in terms of Paris, he brought great aid, the sisters, the priests, and he brought a lot of financial aid to the people who were in trouble and starving and so on. So finally, in this famous part of his life, when he died, some people called him the father of the country because of all he did during those final 35 years of his life. And when you talk about those 35 years of his life, you have to just add a little footnote. He was accompanied by Louise de Marillac during the great partnership. So let's just talk about now Vincent number 1. He was born in 1581, and now we used to think of Vincent as really poor. Wasn't exactly poor. His family actually had some property, and they had some animals, and they were self-sufficient, hardworking, self-sufficient, and so on. Of course, they were subject to all the problems of bad weather, bad crops, bad harvest. All those things could really turn their life upside down. But if things were going pretty well, they were hardworking and self-reliant. So that's Vincent. In regard to this, he was what we know about Vincent. He was a shepherd, right? He took care of the sheep and so on, even the pigs, and also sometimes the cattle. But his family was a farming family, and what is really, I want to emphasize that for a moment. I never really appreciated that for a long time, but the great thing about farmers is that they know there's a time to plant and there's a time to reap. Everything has its time. And at the heart of Vincent's life is the great gift of his fidelity to divine providence. And see, when he met Louise, Louise is from nobility, and she's a city person, and there's a great contrast between them. Vincent's like the earth person, and she's like the city person. And the city person, when you have money, you do what you want to do when you want to do it. But Vincent spent the first 4 years of his guidance of her, trying to get her to understand, helping her to understand, that is, that everything has its time. And it all depends on God. God's our leader. And so it's not that we can do what we want when we want to do it. We have to tune in to providence. Tune into nature, tune into providence. So that's Vincent in his beginning. And then he was ordained early at age 19 in the year 1600. Now, that's against all the rules and so on, but the rules that were published earlier, they didn't take effect in France until 1615. So really, it was common for people to do this. It was not a big, he had all the permissions that he needed and everything like that. But still, nevertheless, his motive was, he was sent by his father to be a priest, and then by his family eventually to come back, and first of all to get a good benefice income, have an early retirement, and come back like that. So that was his purpose. He was a good person, but his purpose was really in a certain way financial for the sake of his family. Okay, so that's where he starts out from. And then he's as a priest, he finally gets his degree at Toulouse at 4 years later, and then he has this episode in which he becomes a captive in North Africa. A woman left him some money, but the money was in the hands of somebody else. And so he went to get the money, and I think he did get it, but on his way back, he took a boat, a ship. And so that ship was met by pirates, and they captured him and brought him to the north coast of Africa, where he spent 2 years. Now, the truth about that is, that we know about that because Vincent wrote 2 letters. And those 2 letters are in his hand, and he told all about his 2 years in captivity. But half the scholars don't believe it. Half the scholars think it never happened, that he made it up. Okay, but he wrote the letters, he made it up. But other people think that it actually did happen. So we don't know about those 2 years. Anyway, it was a problematic time for him, whatever happened. And it involved, in some sense, slavery. One of our colleagues out in Denver, she wrote an interpretation in which she said, okay, it's about slavery, him being a slave for 2 years, right? And she said, well, if it didn't really happen, it's still about his own internal journey of slavery. It's about, he's telling the story about himself, but it didn't happen.